who writes for Jacobin, who you guys know is pretty much my spirit animal. So, Mr. Luke Savage, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me back.
And no relation, just in case anyone's confused. So as I said, you write at Jacobin. You've written amazing articles. I love that publication. They're incredible. One of the things I wanted to discuss is you put out a new article called Barons of the Valley. So I wanted to discuss that. It was really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so this was a piece that I think I wrote some time ago, but it just came out. It just came out this week. And yeah, the thesis of the piece is that when people think of the 19th century, I mean, one of the kind of, I guess, prevailing images of the 19th century are these robber barons, these figures like Cornelius Vanderbilt. It's people who built tremendous fortunes on the back of kind of the industrialization of America. And these are people who had really good reputations at the time, but since, are generally understood to be kind of synonymous with greed and things like that. And I was interested in comparing them to some of the, the famous billionaires of today, and looking at the similarities between them, but also the differences, because I think the billionaires today, when I say the differences, I'm predominantly talking about kind of aesthetics. I think the billionaires of today understand that they need to cut a very different image precisely because people have this very negative impression of extreme wealth in the 19th century during the Gilded Age. And so that's why, people like Twitter's Jack Dorsey, who's worth, I think, $3 billion, or at least he was when I wrote the article. He's probably worth more now. In his case, he cultivates a very kind of monk-like image where, he has this kind of fastidious daily routine. He's kind of a minimalist. I think he's really into meditation. He has a kind of strange diet that he does, things like that. Elon Musk is another example. I mean, he's had some real meltdowns the last few weeks, but he's a guy that really goes out of his way to appear cool. And I think more importantly, he's somebody who is very interested in projecting the image of, he's a guy who invents things. He's a guy who innovates. And if you go back to these to their equivalents in the 19th century, you find they were all doing something very very similar. And so it's really just to make the point that inequality today is actually eerily similar to the inequality of the past, that we kind of, it's pretty much axiomatic in most parts of American society that the inequality of the 19th century was obscene and it was unnecessary. But inequality today is kind of a trickier concept. It's something a lot more people are, I think, willing to accept as just kind of normal and natural. So I wanted to kind of attack that a little bit.
Absolutely. And how do you think that having social media changes that and makes that different?
How does it change what exactly?
Well, because you compare it. However, they didn't have, social media back then. Now we have it, and we're able to kind of address it more, analyze it more, and it becomes more apparent to progressives as a whole. So how do you think that's, even though it's comparable, how is it different because of social media?
That's interesting. I mean, I hadn't really considered that in relation to the piece. I mean, social media it's been remarkable in terms of how it's transformed kind of our collective existence. I do think, sometimes we can kind of overrate the things that happen on there. I think all of us who, spend a lot of time on Twitter in particular kind of understand that sometimes things feel like they have great consequence and they actually don't matter in real life. But with that said, I mean, I think with billionaires, Elon Musk, who I mentioned a moment ago, is a really good example. It's actually had a strangely kind of flattening effect. I mean, we don't know what it would have been like if Cornelius Vanderbilt had Twitter, but because Twitter is just kind of a strange receptacle into which people pour their kind of often ill thought out thoughts and emotions can have a pretty tremendous equalizing effect, because someone like Elon Musk, who's supposedly, this kind of untouchable figure who's going to take us to the stars and whatever else, when he's just melting down constantly on Twitter, I think that does kind of undermine. I think he undermines his own legitimacy, kind of on an almost daily basis. So that's probably a good thing.
The red pill blue pill was like kind of amazing. If you guys haven't seen that, please go to either of our Twitters. It was, yeah, that was beautiful. So, you shared some of the posts that a lot of us did and made commentary on it. Pelosi saying, Trump is like doo-doo on, things like that. How, being a Canadian and not having our same politics, from the outside looking in, how do Americans look to you right now that their people in power are behaving like 5-year-olds?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that I think probably throughout, Canada, the way that kind of stuff would be received is not good, right? It's, but the fact is we have our fair share of that kind of thing here. One of my least favorite types of kind of Nancy Pelosi moments are when she'll go viral because she kind of is seen to passive aggressively clap, for example, at the State of the Union or something. Of course, it later turns out she actually just was clapping, but when those kind of moments sort of go viral, yeah, it's ridiculous. But the thing is, Canada can't really wash its hands of stuff like this because we gave the world Justin Trudeau, who's a guy who, kind of carried himself to international celebrity status, kind of one viral, annoying, shallow symbolic moment at a time or whatever. So, yeah, we have our fair share of that sort of thing here.
So you posted, you shared some posts on the HEROES Act. What is your take on that? I know that's kind of vague, but in summary, what's your take on that?
Well, I'd encourage people to read the very good piece by Andrew Perez. He's kind of gone through forensically, and he's looked at some of the giveaways to lobbyists and other interest groups. So that's disappointing, although not particularly surprising. That the HEROES Act, for people that aren't aware, is kind of, I guess you could say, the House Democratic Party's like first offer, that they're hoping to get through the Senate, hoping to bargain within the Senate. And it's kind of the next phase of the coronavirus relief packages. I actually wrote something about it. I don't think it's out yet, but the kind of, I think, headline piece, the kind of flagship piece in the legislation is this second $1,200 check that's going to go out to Americans. It's, I think that's worth focusing on, because $1,200, particularly if it's not going to be a regular thing. If just every time lawmakers get together and they have a relief package every 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever, when they're doing it, they just debate giving people a $1,200 check. That's not really giving people the security that they need. There's a Senate bill that's co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris as well, and Ed Markey of Massachusetts, which is proposing to give every American, with, very few exceptions, $2,000 a month. So not just kind of arbitrarily when there's one of these packages being negotiated, $2,000 a month, no exceptions, retroactive to March, I believe. Some people argue that won't get through the Republican Senate. Well, it definitely won't get through if the Democratic leadership doesn't get behind it. So, that's the kind of thing that's necessary given the scale of the crisis, and it's the kind of thing that I wish people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi would be more interested in. but I don't have my hopes up there in particular.
Yeah, same. What is Canada doing as far as the virus, and are they issuing payments? Are they how are they handling it economically?
Yeah, so I mean, there have been cash payouts. There's something you can apply for. The eligibility for it was a little narrow at first, and it's been growing. It is better. It's much closer to what I think the United States should be doing. Initially, the Liberal government was a little bit slow to act, but we're actually, the political dynamic in Canada is a bit strange right now because we have a minority parliament. So in theory, the Liberals can't actually pass anything without support from one of the other parties. And the NDP, which is our kind of left-wing Social Democratic Party in Canada, has been very effective at getting the government to adopt various more inclusive schemes for bailing people out, giving people support, that kind of thing. So that's been good. I think Canada just, there are many things you could point to different in the Canadian American response. Right, one of the biggest qualitative differences between Canada and the United States is that Canada has nationalized health insurance. I mean, we have, it's not, what we have is not as sweeping as the Medicare for all bill that Bernie Sanders was pursuing. But basically, if you need to see a doctor in Canada, you're going to be able to see one. And that's, turns out, surprise, surprise, particularly important during a pandemic. So I think in terms of the kind of public health impacts, that's going to be really significant, over the next few months in particular.
Absolutely. All of us posted today, all of us, about Biden's, comment that is being referred to as a gaffe, which is utter bullshit because that's what they call everything he says, about "you ain't black." What was your take when you saw that?
I mean, it's classic Biden, isn't it? At this point, it's hard to know what's in Biden's head every time he does one of these interviews. I mean, often there's kind of a headline thing that people react to. In the case of this interview, it was the particular comment you mentioned. If you go through these interviews, I mean, some of them are just absolutely insane. I mean, he's barely able to string sentences together. He's kind of losing his train of thought and kind of stopping and starting, and it's really ridiculous. So I don't know. I guess this is what the next 6 months are going to be. And as we saw with the comment today, there's just always. I mean, it seems like there's always going to be a class of kind of Democratic affiliated media figures who will just always have an explanation. It seemed like today they had to kind of cycle through various ones and kind of change the story a number of times. Biden's press secretary, for example, seemed to be defending the comment, but then Biden himself kind of tried to walk it back, and et cetera, et cetera. Hey, this is the guy that they chose. This is what they wanted. So I guess we're gonna have 6 months of this unless something really dramatic changes. And Biden isn't officially the nominee yet, so I suppose there may be a small chance that it's not too late to have somebody who can speak in coherent sentences and has less bad politics than Biden. But again, I'm not sure I have my hopes up there because I think this is what they wanted.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you may be right. What is your reaction to him, grilling Klobuchar for VP?
Yeah, I mean, I have a colleague actually who spent a lot of time doing research on Biden, and he and I have kind of had a running bet because I've kind of maintained from the beginning I actually think there's a pretty good chance Biden will pick Klobuchar. I think Klobuchar has, I've done some research on her myself. I wrote a piece a few months ago about her, particularly about the cachet she has in the American media, which I think is very interesting. She's a figure who was really never she was never a top tier candidate, but she got a tremendous amount of media attention. The Beltway media really, really liked Klobuchar, and I, in the piece I wrote, I explored some of the reasons why that was. One of the things that is said about Klobuchar is that she's this kind of blue collar whisperer. She can win these kind of Midwestern, middle class voters and stuff. And I think Biden is the type of person who would probably be quite quick to believe that sort of thing. I think Biden has very particular instincts, political instincts, and I think somebody like Klobuchar probably matches them better than anyone else who's a possibility. Doesn't mean that Biden will pick Klobuchar. I thought the kind of social media reaction that I saw to the story yesterday about how Klobuchar is being vetted was perhaps a little out of proportion, because Klobuchar being vetted doesn't mean Biden's actually going to choose her. And I think everybody kind of knew that she would be probably one of the people in consideration. But I still think there's probably a good chance that he might choose her. There's various parts of the I guess the sort of soft left parts of the American media that really want Warren to be the nominee, the vice presidential nominee. I think that's very unlikely, even though Warren is trying her hardest to kind of shed any kind of last vestiges of progressivism that she had surrounding her so that she can get the job. But I think it's pretty unlikely. So I think Kamala Harris or Amy Klobuchar are probably the two most likely candidates. Gretchen Whitmer is another one who seems pretty plausible, but who knows? Biden may pick someone that none of us have ever heard of. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. What is your reaction when you see people, especially pundits or even, just regular, Twitter users say that Joe should pick Liz Warren because that'll win over burners?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's been this effort to kind of make it seem as if Biden could actually end up running as a kind of progressive figure, and Elizabeth Warren's often kind of a major character in that particular piece of fan fiction. I mean, I'm not convinced. I mean, if you look at the stuff Warren herself is saying, it's pretty clear that she wants the job, but she doesn't really care how she gets it. I mean, if she runs, she's not going to run. She's not going to run as a progressive. She's going to run as Biden's running mate. So I guess that if she somehow were the vice presidential nominee, that would give, I mean, some people would kind of superficially, on a superficial level, feel that was great. But, Biden is almost certainly going to run, regardless of whose running mate is, the exact kind of campaign that, befits his political instincts, which is one that targets suburbanites and kind of, conservatively inclined voters, one that, is kind of triangulating, one that maybe you go to his website and there are kind of progressive measures that are listed in his policy book, but then he mysteriously never brings them up or mentions them. I mean, if you go back to 2016 and you look at some of the things that were in the Democratic platform there, some of it wasn't bad, but did Hillary Clinton ever really talk about it on the campaign trail? Absolutely not. And then, if she had been elected president, it probably would have just, it would have just stopped coming up, and no one would mention it again. And I think that's what will happen with Biden as well. Another thing I would say about Elizabeth Warren is she might be popular with parts of the media, and she definitely does have a base of people that like her a lot. But I mean, she did not do well in kind of electoral terms. I mean, she came third in her home state. She didn't win a single primary. So is she actually going to bring over large numbers of people, particularly supporters of Bernie Sanders, a group of people that she spent several months quite actively and deliberately antagonizing? I don't think so.
Yeah, definitely not this burner. That's for damn sure. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, you actually had a debate with a gentleman recently on socialism. So how did that come about, and what was your experience doing that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was just a few hours ago. It was a debate, basically a socialism versus capitalism debate with a fellow from something called the Institute for Liberal Studies, which is a kind of, I guess, classical libertarian organization here in Canada. I think there is a YouTube link up so people can check it out there if they're interested. I hadn't ever done a live debate over Zoom before, so it was an interesting challenge. It's the kind of thing I'd like to do more of. It was fun. I'll let other people judge, whether I quote unquote won or not. But I guess obviously I think I did because I found my own arguments very persuasive.
Yeah, and if you're recommending people watch it, I would think you thought you did a good job. What else did? Oh, so Medicare for All, you kind of touched on. You guys have, lack of a better term, your version of it. As being in Canada and watching the way that we're suffering during COVID, what is your takeaway? What do you think, we can do differently as Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bernie, the kind of moral terms that Bernie cast the debate in, I think that's the correct way of seeing it. I mean, you can either have a system where healthcare is a commodity, meaning that it's just like anything else. It can be, it needs to be bought and sold. It's kind of a luxury that some people can afford, and others can't, or even if some people can afford it, they have kind of a worse version than, if you're rich, you have better healthcare in the United States, almost certainly, than if you're poor. And that's a function of healthcare in the United States being a commodity. It is a marketplace. It is a tremendously profitable industry. And it's perhaps the most emblematic case there is of how having something in the marketplace, I mean, this came up in the debate I did earlier today, having something in the marketplace, if its purpose is to service a basic human need, having it in the marketplace is extremely destructive. And Medicare for All, I mean, if it ever comes to the United States, I think you'll find that in, 3 years, 5 years, or, less perhaps, people will look back on the system that existed before and they'll think it's absolutely ridiculous. And the political consensus around it, the popular consensus, will be so strong that even conservative politicians will be terrified to run against it. In Canada, we've had some form of universal health care since the early 1960s. And even though in the 80s and 90s, there were parts of the conservative movement that I guess they flirted with the idea of kind of being openly for some form of private health care, that has never had any kind of, I mean, you probably couldn't even find, even on the kind of fringes of the conservative backbench in Canada, conservative members of parliament who would openly advocate for dismantling Canadian healthcare because it's just too popular, even among people that vote for the Conservative Party. And the reason it's so popular is because it works and people like it, which is one of the reasons why in the United States there's been such a concerted effort, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent on undermining Medicare for All, funding candidates who attack Medicare for All, like the presumptive Democratic nominee, for example, kind of sowing misinformation about what it actually is. Over the past year, we heard all these ridiculous talking points about, it's the government taking away the, insurance that you get from your through your employer, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is because, the private health industry, health insurance industry knows that if anything like Medicare for All ever comes to the United States, they're done for, and their profits are done for as well. And you only have to look at Canada to see that that's true.
Absolutely. So we're run out of time, unfortunately, but where can my viewers here find you? What is your Twitter and what can they expect next?
Yeah, well, so people can find me at Luke W. Savage on Twitter. That's kind of, where I post my articles and I guess where I'm kind of most publicly visible. I have a few things coming out over the next little while. I have a piece about, generational politics and in which I'm kind of arguing that the current generation, the generation that was so overwhelmingly supportive of Bernie, actually is a lot more radical than previous younger generations, which is, I think, something that a lot of people misunderstand. People just kind of assume that younger people are always more radical. It's actually not always the case. If you look back in history, for example, young people voted pretty strongly for Reagan in 1984, which is something that you wouldn't think would be the case, but it was. And that's true in other countries as well. I have a piece on a couple of new reports, one about the number of people that have been released from prison during the coronavirus, which is actually not very many. The American prison system is failing to meet the recommendations of public health officials and experts in terms of letting people out of prisons, which are understandably, predictably hotspots for the spread of the virus. And I'm always looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States to see how many people are losing their jobs, because unemployment is absolutely off the charts. And of course, in the United States, because as we talked about, so many people get their health care through their employer, their health insurance rather, through their employer, they're losing their health insurance as well. So I'm trying to kind of keep a tally, pay very close attention to just how many people are actually losing their health insurance. So all those things are going to be out in the near future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to talk to you. Thank you guys for tuning in. Also, thank you guys so much for all the birthday wishes yesterday. It was amazing. Even though I was quarantined, it was actually a really good day. I have a lot of great shows coming up. But I do want to say tomorrow night I'll be going live at 9 p.m. Eastern with an announcement. I'm not preggers. That's not what it is. And also my book with Nate Sliver, aka Pat the Burner, will be taking pre-orders in a few weeks next month. So thank you again once more, Luke, for coming on. I love your writing. Also, whoever is watching, please subscribe to Jacobin. Also, not just, follow them on Twitter, but get like the tangible Jacobin, because it's amazing. I love it. And we need publications like that to stay in print because they are so rare. So thank you once more, Luke. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much. Keep in touch.